One of my good friends in high school had this lake house. It was given to his parents by their grandparents, and they lived in this house from 1990 to 93. One day in 93, his mom woke him and his younger sister up, and they left the house. Mind you, it was like 2 or 3 a.m. They went to a restaurant that was open 24/7 and stayed there until sunrise and went home, packed all of their clothing and other important things and left the house. They never went back, and his mother will not talk about what happened. They still own this property. It has 2 homes on it and is lakefront, probably worth millions. The power is still on, and his dad comes and checks on it every so often. So in hearing that story, we of course went to the lake house. As we pulled up, a motion sensor floodlight flicked on and stayed on. We unlocked the deadbolt, which requires a key to open on both sides, and walked in. Instantly, you got that creepy feeling like someone was watching you. We walked around for about half an hour, walking up the stairs and unlocking another door with a deadbolt on both sides, and man was it eerie. All the furniture was still set up, his sister's nursery still intact, and a tea kettle still on the stove. Just straight up creepy in every way. Finally, we go to leave and decide to go through the garage. I have the keys, and again, you have to have a key to unlock it from the inside. I'm trying to open the door and turn around to get a light, just in time to see a rock come from somewhere down the hall and hit my foot. Staring at all 3 of my friends and not seeing them do anything with their arms or leg or anything else, I decide to try to unlock the door more rapidly. I finally find the right key and put it in the keyhole. As soon as I do, the garage door opens about 2 feet, and thanks to the motion sensor floodlight that's still on, I can see a chair in the garage. The chair proceeds to be thrown against the wall with a violence I can't describe, and the garage door is slammed shut. I turn around to say, let's get the hell out of here, and I see a rock come from the darkness and hit the wall with a lot of force right next to my head. At this point, I'm done. We run back to the stairs down to the basement, and the door, which requires a key on either side to lock or unlock, we had left unlocked. Well, it's locked. Well, we're freaking out, hearing what sounds like heavy running footsteps upstairs. I'm panicking to find the key. Finally, I find it and unlock the door. We run to the next door, and you guessed it, it's locked. I again find the right key as the footsteps are getting louder and coming down the stairs. We run out the door, and it gets left open by the last person out, and then as we go to shut it, the door is slammed shut, and instantly you hear the deadbolt get locked. At this point, we are only focusing on getting out of this place. We run to the truck, and all 4 of us pile in. As soon as the truck starts, every single light in that house comes on at once. My buddy slams it into reverse, and we are flying down this very long driveway, and as soon as our tires leave the gravel and hit the pavement, every light in the house turns off, leaving it in absolute darkness. There is something very, very bad in that house. I'm not sure what it is, but I'll never go back, and I absolutely believe in ghosts, demons, or whatever. I was walking with my buddies to another friend's house around 1 a.m. one night. We had been drinking a bit, but the night was young, and we were carrying on elsewhere and making our way down a long county road that was adjacent to some wide open fields that extended off into a distant forest. It was a clear moonlit night, and I remember feeling very clear-headed and enjoying the night air as we walked. As we walked along, I was casually drinking in the scenery in a way you only can at 1 a.m. on a cool moonlight night and looking off into a field. As I slowly scanned the area, I noticed something extremely dark, maybe 150 meters, 500 feet away. Well, while the whole field was practically shining with moonlight, with light cloud patterns throwing bits of shade, this thing was as black as could be. It was low to the ground. It was like something had an impossibly black blanket or shroud tossed over it, and it seemed to be very slowly moving in a drifting, shuffling kind of manner. I remember staring at it for 5 long seconds before I felt like I was jolted and realized I was looking at something very wrong. As the moonlight swept across the field and moved, and the clouds played across the field, this thing was just there, looking like a total absence of light, just pure blackness, shuffling slowly, low to the ground. I watched it with shocked fascination until we walked past the field and I lost it. I felt like I was too stunned to say anything and only brought it up when we got to my friend's house. All my friends ribbed me and laughed at me and said I was skunked seeing shit in the dark and that I didn't see anything. They didn't even let me describe what I saw. I pretty much got out what I saw, some messed up shit in the field, and they were like, leave it alone, man. We don't need that tonight. Well, a few minutes later, my friends and then girlfriend came over to me and quietly said that she saw something strange too, that she saw something very, very black that looked incredibly strange and out of place. I told her I saw the same thing and thanked her for making me feel sane, and we never ended up talking about it again. Nowadays, when I think about it, I'm like, what could that possibly have been? Some kind of alien with a cloaking shroud? A night or forest spirit just spooking out in the field? I just can't think of anything to describe it. The whole field around it, in front of it, behind it, was lit with bright, sweeping moonlight, and this thing was just completely and utterly black, like a void. What the hell was it? I slept on the 3rd floor in this large attic-like space with no doors and slanted ceilings directly above my sister's room. It was a really old house, and we didn't have the money to always keep up with the needed repairs, and many of the ones that slipped past us happened to involve the roof above my bedroom. So I had a lot of leaking that would happen in my room when it rained. How we dealt with this was putting cooking pots on my floor under the leaks to catch drips. They stayed there constantly because you never know when a drizzle will start, and I was off at college. My older parents didn't want to have to run upstairs for every possible rain. This is important to remember for later in my story. Anyway, I came home from college for a weekend, and my sister told me that since I had left for college, she kept hearing someone walk above her room, which, remember, was my bedroom. We were the only kids living in the house as my brother had moved, and my parents never went to the 3rd floor, ever. She said every single night, after everyone was in bed, she'd hear the creaks of someone walking in my room, distant footsteps, but loud. She had asked my parents, and they swore they hadn't gone up, which they would have to pass her room to get up there anyway, and again, old creaky house, she would have heard them walk by. But they believed her fully, as they had heard the footsteps and walking too. There was a storage space across from my room in a similar style with the slanted ceilings and no door, and they were connected, only separated by the landing at the top of the stairs and sheets I had hung for privacy to act as a door. We were super classy, obviously. They said they had heard the walking in the spare storage room also, and could hear whatever it was walking over into my side of the space. I honestly didn't think much of it, as I had lived in that house for 20 years and experienced a lot of weird crap, so I shrugged it off. But over that weekend, as I stayed in that room, Something happened that cemented for me just how haunted that house really was. I was asleep on the far side of the room, away from the stairs. Remember those pots I mentioned? This is where they come into play. Something about them I didn't mention was that some were next to each other, almost touching, but not quite. And when I'd walk across my old creaky floor, the floorboards would shift, and certain spots you step on would cause the pots to clink together, something I grew very used to hearing as I walked across my room over the years. One night I'm in bed, asleep, and I'm awoken by the sound of the pots clinking and the floor creaking. The unmistakable noise I had heard millions of times before as I walked that room myself. I could hear the progression. First, the pot closest to the stairs clinking against another as someone or thing, I guess, walked by it. Then the next set of pots clinking closer. Then the floorboard that creaked halfway into my room. I could tell something was walking towards my bed. I had my back toward where the noise was coming from because, like a psychopath, I slept facing the wall in a haunted house. Eventually, I heard the creak of the floorboard directly next to my bed, which in all actuality was an air mattress on the floor. Again, very classy. And could feel the floorboard under the mattress shift as if someone was standing over my bed. I rolled over and looked up to see a giant, maybe 7-foot tall shadow standing over my bed, leaning over so its shoulders and head shape were over my bed. No discernible features other than the fact it had impossibly huge, wide shoulders and was incredibly tall and large. No facial features, just a giant, solid shadow. I covered myself with the blanket, which in retrospect is not the best mode of escape, but what am I going to do? Run from a demon? I hid under my covers for a while and never heard any movement. I finally mustered the courage to peek back out, and nothing was there. Somehow, I slept again that night, though not well. In the morning, I told my mom what had happened, and before I was able to describe the shadow man, as I called it, to my mom, she interrupted me to say, was it this giant, solid shadow, like impossibly tall and wide? When I asked how she knew, she said she had woken up before to see him standing in her bedroom door. In that incident, in her sleepy haze, she thought it was my dad getting ready for work and tried to speak to him. But then from behind her, my dad, who was sleeping in bed, said my mom's name. What are you going on about? It's the middle of the night. My mom looked at him, looked back at the door, and the figure was gone. We moved shortly after this for separate reasons, and as I went into therapy, also for separate reasons, I started to have memories come back to me from my childhood. Memories that included me speaking to what I called, as a child, the blue shadow man in my parents' room. He'd stand in the corner and I'd talk to him. I don't remember much about when I was younger and him, but I can picture it vividly now, and am sure he had been in the house all those decades, only reappearing to me in my 20s. I sometimes wonder if the new owners have seen him or it, but don't want to ask and terrify the poor people. There were definitely multiple entities in that house. I was a student in the Netherlands at the time. One afternoon, my mother and I went to the local cemetery to visit and clean the grave of my grandmother. As we were watching the graves, we talked about life, death, and possible life after death. Since I was highly convinced there wasn't any life after death, I decided that this was the perfect place and time to bravely state out loud that if there indeed was any life after death, it could reveal itself to me, there and then, that I was open for it. Immediately, I felt quite uncomfortable. but assumed that this was irrational. Nothing happened, no sign of the dead. So we cleaned the grave, drank some coffee afterwards. My mom went home and I went to my student home. I forgot about the whole cemetery thing and my girlfriend came over. We watched some movies and eventually went to bed. In bed we were talking about random happy stuff and were getting ready to sleep. We said goodnight and laid down to sleep. Then, out of nowhere, I felt very, very uncomfortable. At that exact moment, my girlfriend said that she also felt uncomfortable and wanted to lay against me, and so she did, holding me tight. Those were the last words we spoke that night. I will try to explain what I experienced. At first, I thought it was her discomfort that I was feeling, which would have been very strange. Then something even stranger unfolded. An invisible, intense presence of panic and fear entered the room and rapidly grew stronger. There was nothing to physically see, but the air in the room became very thick. Then a sort of invisible ball of panic seemed to bounce from wall to wall. Convinced this was all happening in my head, I was afraid that I was having a stroke or psychosis or something like that. I decided to sit it out and closed my eyes. But then in my head, with my eyes closed, I could vaguely see the shape of a man flashing by. Only a couple of times. It was a man of about 50 years old with a beer belly and a goatee. He had a disproportionate big mouth and was screaming in total fear. He was obviously the ball of panic bouncing from wall to wall in my room. Not knowing what to do with the surreal situation, I started talking to the goatee guy in my head, like, "How can you talk in your head?" I said things like, "There is nothing I can do for you," and "Please go away." But that clearly didn't reach him. This was all quite an intense, surreal experience of utter chaos, panic, fear, and thick air filling my small room. It seemed to last 10 minutes, but it was probably way shorter. And then from one moment to another, it was gone. The room was empty again. Like the worst thunderstorm suddenly made place for a sunny day with whistling birds. I barely ever slept so incredibly relieved, and because of that, I fell asleep almost instantly. The next day, my girlfriend and I got up just like any other morning, and in the kitchen, we drank coffee to get powered up for the day. I forgot the whole thing until my girlfriend told me that she really felt very uncomfortable the night before. Remembering everything again, I told her I also really felt very uncomfortable and told her I felt a presence of panic in the room. She said she experienced the same panic and told me that she even vaguely saw the shape of a guy in his 50s with a beer belly. I said, "No way. With a goatee?" And she started crying. "With a goatee," she says. We were both very shocked. Apparently we experienced the same exact invisible guy bouncing against the walls like a ghost in panic. It took me a few hours to realize that I called the whole thing on myself by stating that life after death could reveal itself to me at the cemetery the day before. I seriously never expected it to do so. The fact that my girlfriend experienced the exact same thing confirmed for me that this was not a mental thing that happened in my head. I probably would have dismissed the whole thing otherwise. Since that day, I have the feeling that this whole life-death thing is more magical than we perceive it. And with magic, I mean that we don't quite have any idea about how and why. I guess the guy with his beer belly and goatee was hanging around his own grave at the cemetery. Maybe he died not so long ago and was still in panic about the situation. And here I come along, ignorantly inviting every dead person on the graveyard for coffee. Somehow he's interested, but can only come around late at night, like ghosts do. He then tries to reach at me with his panic bouncing ball thing. But it's bad communication, and because of my fear, I just keep laying there, still, like I don't even notice him. I'm trying to talk to the guy in my head to make him go away, but that evidently doesn't reach him at all. And after a while, he decides to leave because nothing is happening. I'm very happy that he is gone, and I fall asleep like a prince. My house is haunted. I grew up in an old house where the original part of the house was built in 1945, and the rest of the house that was added on later was built in the early 1960s. My grandparents had the back half and upstairs built for my father and his siblings, 4 kids in total. My father told me that when they first moved into the house, which was at first just the front part, the neighbor's kid told him that the old people that used to live there died in there. Turns out an older couple lived there, and the wife passed away in the bathroom, and later on the husband passed in his bedroom, which later turned into the dining room. When the other part of the house was being added, the man who was building the stairs had a heat stroke and passed away on the job. The house was finished by his son. My dad said after the house was finished and they all settled in, at a certain time at night, you could hear someone walking up the stairs, but when looking down the stairs, there was no one there. When I was a kid, I used to have lots of instances where I would see someone standing next to me or at the door, and I would turn and look, and it was as if they would walk off. I had a moment one time when my sister was staying with my mom and I was at the house watching a movie in my room. I had swore my sister was in her bed next to mine, and I started laughing at whatever I was watching and turned to look at her, and nobody was there. That made me feel ugly afterwards. There was a funny and terrifying moment when I had a friend sleeping over and I was telling her about the ghost on the stairs. She didn't believe me, but was clearly scared of the story I was telling her. The door was closed, and all of a sudden you could hear the loud creaking of someone walking up the stairs, and I just thought, perfect timing. She was freaking out, and I was just like, it's okay, nothing bad is going to happen. Then all of a sudden, my door swung open. My heart just sunk. This had never happened before, and I was terrified, but I tried to play it off as nothing as my friend was crying at this point. Also, the reason why I was so terrified was because my door, it's hard to open and requires you to throw your shoulder into the door to push it open. At night, I was afraid of the dark, and my dad would leave my door open with the stair light on as a night light when he would leave for his night shift job. We lived with my grandparents, and their room was next to the staircase, where there were windows that were originally the windows of the original house. They just added the back and stairs to the house without removing the windows. The light bothered my grandfather at night, so at some point he would come upstairs and turn the stair light off. I would wake up to my room in complete darkness, but see that the door was still cracked open and could feel someone standing there, watching me sleep. I had an experience when I was in middle school where I had woke up in the middle of the night to get some water. I can't see a damn thing without my glasses, but I knew my house like the back of my hand and could walk through it in complete darkness without running into anything. I remember walking downstairs and turning the corner to the long hallway leading to the kitchen, and I remember seeing my grandma walking in the hallway, or what looked like my grandma. I said her name, but she didn't respond. As I got closer, I stopped and felt like my heart sank when I could make out that it wasn't her, and whatever it was passed through the left side of my arm and shoulder. The goosebumps that grew on my skin felt so violent and so cold, but I remember turning around and booking it back upstairs. My dad was in the other room next to mine and heard me stomping my feet up the stairs and came in my room wondering what had happened. I told him and he didn't believe me until months later it happened to him. In high school, I started smoking weed with my dad. I know, it sounds bad, but I was a straight A student and had my shit together. My dad wasn't happy about it, but I never went out or did anything bad. We kept it a secret. My grandfather passed away in 2013, right in the beginning of my senior year, and I had pretty much stopped it for a while. One day, my dad was like, I have a nug, you want to smoke? And I figured, sure, why not? I was sitting on the floor taking a hit from a joint, and when I exhaled, the smoke spread apart right in front of my face, like when you blow smoke at a flat surface and it spreads out. I wasn't sure what I saw was my imagination or not until my dad yelled, "It's Lido," the name we called my grandfather. It gave me a shiver down my spine, and I didn't smoke weed for a few months after that. Weird stuff happened after my grandfather passed as well, such as the lights flickering when we spoke about him, and the sound of change in someone's pocket rattling down the hallway, as he always carried an insane amount of change in his pocket. For years now, I haven't had an incident until recently. My grandmother has developed Alzheimer's, and she has a hard time sleeping. About 2 months ago, I was walking downstairs to the restroom, and as I turned to walk down the hallway, I heard the loudest exhale and sigh. It startled me so badly that my whole body tensed up and I fell to the ground, then ran back upstairs. It sounded like my grandmother, but it also sounded like it was right in my ear. When I told my dad, we ran back downstairs with my dogs as my dad thought maybe someone was in the house, but there was nothing. We walked into my grandma's room, expecting her to be awake, but she was fast asleep. I can't explain that noise I heard, but now, when I walk downstairs at night, I have to cover my ears as I'm afraid of hearing it again. Well, I hope you enjoyed these stories, and tell me in the comments below whether anything paranormal has ever happened to you. If you enjoyed these stories, please give me a like. It really does help the channel out. And also, if you haven't subscribed, I hope you do so. Well, thank you, and have a nice day. Bye.